Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Pancakes. I am your resident pancake heathen, Ian, and today we have a very powerful podcast. We have Tomas Perez, founder of Epik Project, and their sole mission is to stop human sex trafficking. We're also going to learn all things about Tom growing up in the Windy City, Tom playing college football in Montana, and him ultimately becoming a pastor before he starts his life work with Epik Project. Friends, if you like what we're doing here on Podcakes and also over on the Motorcycles and Pancakes YouTube channel, please consider becoming a Patreon member. It is only less than a cup of coffee per month, and it helps create all of this content that we bring to you. If you're watching this on YouTube, please go down, make sure you like, subscribe, share, leave that comment, even if it's only one word. If you're on the Apple Podcasts or the Spotify's, go ahead and do the same thing. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you know when we're dropping new content. And make sure you leave that comment down below. It kickstarts that algorithm, it does all that fancy stuff, and it helps this channel grow. Friends, without further ado, here is Tomas Perez with Epik Project. Tom, just like that, man, we're live. I am very grateful that you're here today.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, this is, I think, second attempt? We tried to schedule this before.
Yes.
I think it was probably on my end, if I remember correctly.
Oh, no, I think I had travel come up for something. I had been traveling a lot this fall. So, yeah, well, we did it.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here we are. We're getting this thing going. So before we get going, why don't we just have you give us a brief synopsis of who you are and a little bit about Epik Project, and we're definitely going to dive into all of that.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, anybody that listens to the podcast, they know that we're going to jump back in time. But yeah, why don't you just give us a brief hello and tell us a little bit about yourself and what we're get to find out about you today.
Yeah. My name is Tomas Perez, and I guess I'll start from the present day, and then we can go backwards from there. But I'm the founder of Epik Project, which started 13, give or take 13 years ago as me just volunteering and looking for ways to be involved in the work, kind of the fight against sex trafficking. I had no clue, what all of the pieces of that were. I just knew, I couldn't not do something, and it came from a honest place. I'm a dad. I have 3 grown daughters. When I started, that's all I had was 3 grown daughters. Now I also have 3 grandkids. So it's become real at a deeper level. I've been married the homecoming queen from college. I've been married for 41 years to my wife, Sean.
Wow.
Yeah, my wife, Sean, and she is a third generation Montanan with actual ranchers in her family tree that are nothing like Kevin Costner. But we have and Yellowstone, but we have some deep roots in Montana. I grew up in Chicago and in Illinois in the Midwest. We can go into that later, but been doing this work full time. Like I said, I never thought it would be a full-time thing. It was just a volunteer, hey, I got to do something. And it started by me organizing a motorcycle rally that went from Portland, Oregon to Seattle. So There's one motorcycle tie-in my story.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
And we are so going to hit these out of the park.
Yeah.
I think with what you're saying is there's a lot of interest in with me and knowing more about you, and you just like sweeten the pot right there.
Yeah.
Like, motorcycle rally. Okay. Yep. That's a big ride too, shooting up there.
Yeah.
So
pretty boring, just straight up the interstate, but we were making a statement. It was pretty cool.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear more about that.
Yeah.
And then you also said grandkids. You know, I too have 3 grandkids, and some of the best moments of my life is hanging out. You know, I got 2 girls and 1 little boy. So it's amazing.
I got 2 boys and 1 girl.
Oh, We just flippity floppity.
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool. All right, man. Well, let's kick this thing backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Chicago. So let's
Yep.
find out about little Tom growing up over there in the Windy City.
Yeah, I am the eldest son of a Cuban immigrant and a Swedish and Dutch woman from the south side of Chicago. So it's yeah, five siblings in the family. My dad came here in 1950, 55 or 56. I can't remember exactly. He was a physician. Graduated from the University of Havana at the same time that Fidel Castro graduated with a law degree. My dad had his medical degree, and they actually grew up playing baseball against each other. And
Wow.
in at the university, my dad was not a fan of his at all. Shoved him out of a classroom one time when he tried to take over the class, and but he got out because he obviously he's reading the writing on the wall. So he landed in Chicago and fell in love with my wife. My dad was a dashing young Cuban pediatrician, and my mom was the beautiful blonde charge nurse on the pediatric floor. And so they would tell you it was a marriage of convenience, but it lasted 50, no, almost 60 years.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, so grew up in suburban Chicago, and just not a really safe, uh, kind of childhood. I'm of the generation, where our parents said be home at dark, and you could just go outside and play all day, right? And
Yeah,
just
same.
be home before dark. So I
Street lights
grew
come
up.
on, you better be home.
Yep, exactly. So
Yep.
I grew up, and I don't know if I call it idyllic, but pretty normal, um, uh, environment. And what I learned after the fact is my dad did a lot to try to shield us from uh, the racism at the time, and the fear against communism. My dad's he was his grandfather, I think, was black, so he was from a biracial family himself, and he looked definitely very Cuban. But it was a time when that wasn't a real popular thing. He was, because he was a doctor. I think he had a little more status in the community. But then he also came from what had become a communist country, and this was in the height of the Cold War. And so, just those two things, I think, weighed heavy on him, and um, he did what he could to try to insulate his family from some of that, and for the most part, we were I think we were blissfully ignorant of a lot of that stuff going on. We've learned all this now, as adults looking back on it. But my given name is Armando Tomas Perez Jr. Armandito is what they would have called me, little Armando, because that's my dad's name. But my siblings got very Anglo names: Heidi, Laura, Randy, and Christopher. Um, and but because I'm the eldest son, and that was kind of the tradition back in the day, that was the name that I was given. My dad admitted later on that he would have preferred to name me Henry, to kind of keep with that theme of, Anglo kind of names. So
Yeah.
you could have been talking to Hank, but it's instead it's uh, I'm Tommy, because I grew up in Chicago, so it's Tommy.
Oh, Tommy. Okay.
Tommy. Yep. Yep. So
Man.
that was my growing up. I it was kind of a given that we were going to go to college. That was just part of the culture that I grew up in. My dad and mom were educated, so when it came time to do that, I wanted to go far away, and I wanted to study to become a forest ranger, because I just had that, kind of that
Nice.
fantasy of being out in the woods. And so I went to the University of Montana. So I did go far away, and it took me about 6 months to realize I was not cut out for that because of all the science and math required. So, but by that time, I had earned a full scholarship to play football at the University of Montana. And so I wasn't going to throw that away. So I changed my major and set my sights on this beautiful young gymnast who had showed up on campus. And she would eventually become my wife. So I stayed and put down roots in Montana, and really, except for 1 year, have never lived for any length of time back in the Midwest. So I've been in the kind of the Rocky Mountain West or the West Coast for my entire life, adult life.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, we just jumped over a whole bunch of stuff that just struck my interest.
yeah,
So, first thing I'd like to know is just when I grew up in like Milwaukee, Oregon, right? So, if you don't know where that is, it's a suburb of Portland. And it was very Leave It to Beaver kind of, June Ward kind of neighborhood,
yep,
right? It was just very very nice, and it wasn't scary. It was like everybody was just out, and so we would roam around, and we were kind of the hellions, right? So we were like the kids growing up, the boys. We had out there riding our BMX bikes, trying to see how high we can jump them, and bike
yeah,
wrestle, and shoot cars with BB guns, and all that kind of stuff. But I'm curious, like, kinda growing up where you are, because you were saying it wasn't really that safe. Did you ever have, like, a situation when you're out playing where you're just kinda like, "Oh, hey, this isn't a good situation, we need to remove ourselves," or
No, I
maybe
think it was pretty safe. Honestly, the what I remember, and my siblings would probably verify this, if there was anything going on that was unsafe, I was usually the source of that unsafe thing.
you and
I
I are exactly the
oh yeah,
same. Love it.
you had BB guns. I played with fire, literally. Yeah, I was
Okay,
fascinated with
okay.
fire. So yeah, anything unsafe was usually because I was doing something unsafe and stupid.
Check.
So so yeah,
That's
other than that, it was
yeah,
is just you talked about Ward and June Cleaver.
mm,
This is dating both of us, but for me, I grew up with Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. That was
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, my dad
yeah.
was the dashing Cuban.
Oh yeah, that's pretty funny actually.
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
it was like the things in my neighborhood that were going on that were gonna be like, "Oh, there's Ian again, and there's Ian and Paul, and the boys running up and down the street," I'd be on a motorcycle screaming down the street and pulling somebody on a skateboard or in a wagon or something,
yeah,
wait for dad to fall asleep and push the Ford Ranger 3 blocks down the road and then go joyriding all night. That was kinda the
yeah.
stuff we were doing.
I
I mean, I never did anything like that, Dad, if you're listening. That never, ever happened.
yeah, it's funny the things our kids tell us once they become adults, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, for real.
I wanted to be like that as a kid. Like, I wanted to be the one on the motorcycle. We had a neighbor who, their son had I think I want to say it was a Triumph, or it might have been a Honda, like 750, but, um, he was killed, on his motorcycle, when I was a kid, maybe starting middle school. So I mean, like I can still remember it. And of course, I have a dad who's a doctor and a mom who's a nurse. So you think they're going to go for me getting on a
Right.
motorcycle?
Right.
Nah,
Yeah.
no. I
Not
thought
so
there was a
much.
there was a brief moment when I got a paper route as my very first job, and the only reason I got it is because I thought if I was earning money, they would let me buy a Honda Mini Trail 50, which is
Yes.
the Honda Monkey. Now, if you look it up, it was the
Right.
prototype of that motorcycle, and I was smitten the minute I saw it. And so I thought, well, I'm going to get a job, and as soon as I got the job, and they made it clear that that wasn't going to happen, I quit the job. So that's like, well, and
Some people
I don't
fit.
want to get up at 5 in the morning and deliver papers. So,
Oh, I love it. That's
yeah,
funny. My buddy Chris down the street, he had one of those little 50s, a little trail bike. It
yep,
was awesome.
yeah.
Lots of,
Ever since then, I just dreamed about them and thought they were magic.
oh, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
So you said you went to Montana and we're playing some foosball.
yep.
So at what age did you find football? And was there other
Um,
sports that you were playing?
no, I am not really. My wife was. She's an athlete. If you talk to my kids, my wife was an athlete. She's a 4-time state gymnastics champion in high school. And just could do
Jeez.
amazing things. I was big and strong and had a high pain tolerance. So I was the perfect like offensive lineman. That's all I ever did was just play that particular position. But I did it, I did it well enough to, pay for my education.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That is pretty cool. So you started middle school, high school?
I started I started in middle school. I had ambitions to like really be a musician, and I had been taking guitar lessons for a couple of years, and I knew like two and a half chords after like 2 years. And my sister, all three of my sisters, were very musically gifted. My oldest sister said, I want to learn how to play guitar. So she went and bought herself a guitar, and in like a month just blew right by me. And I just read the writing on the wall. And I thought, yeah, my future is not in music.
Right.
So it really was middle school. I grew up in Chicago in the 60s and 70s. So it was all about the Bears, the going to watch the Chicago Bears. And I grew up watching Dick Butkus and Mike Ditka and Gale Sayers and, all those guys. And so that, that, that seemed like a more achievable dream that I could be a good football player than that I could be a good musician. So, and I was right. I was a much
That's
better
funny.
football player. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
played through high school. I was a walk on when I went to college. Back before anybody knew what that was, I just showed up, and I at the University of Montana in August of 1978. Scared spitless, but I had received an invitation to show up and see what I could do. And after a month of getting the crap beat out of me every day, I was handed a scholarship. So
Wow.
yeah, so I
What was
just
that like?
it was a crazy experience. It was the day I can remember it so clearly. It was the day we were training camp was like 5 weeks before classes started. So we were on campus, two practices a day, 5-6 days a week. Really not much of a break, but it's pretty grueling. It was the day of registration for classes, and we're in the locker room. We had a practice, and one of the assistant coaches says, "Hey, Perez, coach wants to see you. Bring your playbook." And I knew from what other stories I had heard that usually means you're done. And
Oh God.
so I go walking up to his office and sit down, and he flings this piece of paper across his desk at me. It's this tiny little piece of paper, and I pick it up, and it was the check my dad had written 5 weeks prior to cover the cost of training camp. I had to pay for it. My dad had to pay for it. And he goes, "You can tear that up. We're not going to cash that check." And then he tosses another piece of paper at me, and I can remember I picked it up, and it had the NCAA logo on it, and it said National Letter of Intent. And he goes, "I want you to sign that because I think he could play for us." And
Wow.
I didn't really know what was happening, but I signed it and ran back to my dorm room to call my mom because we didn't have phones in our pockets, right? Um,
Right.
I literally had the rotary dial phone, and I had to call my parents, and my mom didn't believe me. And finally, I said,
No.
she didn't believe me. And so I said, "Give the phone to dad." And so my dad got on, and yeah, so it was pretty surreal, and yeah, I was just happy to play. I just loved playing, and this meant I was going to get to play more, and uh,
Oh
and
yeah.
that and that was just that was just good news. And I was, still a long way from home. I measured at one time as 1,550 miles from my dorm to my home. So, and this was again without FaceTime or cell phones or anything like that. So I had made the move. But I was getting to do something I never thought I'd get to do. And, yeah, so it was huge, hugely formative in my life. Being able to play at that level. Um, and it took its toll on my body, but in terms of
Yeah.
like what it did for me as a person, I've always just really, really loved the experience.
So what was it like for you? You know, maybe did you travel right away? Was your first travel like your freshman year, or did they
Yeah,
kind of teach you for a little bit?
I missed one travel game in 4 years. So yeah, I started right away. I think that first year we played. Who did we play? San Jose State, Nevada, Las Vegas. We might have. Oh no, you know what it was? It was Portland State was the game I didn't get to travel for. Ironically, my freshman
Oh,
year,
yeah.
because we came out here and played Portland State. Um, so yeah, it was. It was the late '70s, so we had to. Uh, they expected us to wear three-piece suits when we traveled.
Oh, wow.
And I can remember we played University of Northern Arizona in Flagstaff, but at the
Yeah.
time they didn't have a big enough airport for big planes to land there. So we landed in Phoenix. We left Missoula, Montana, and it was 25 or 30 degrees, and we all had on our, I had a three-piece wool suit, and we land in Phoenix, and it's 106. And the bus they sent to pick us up in didn't have any air conditioning. And if you've ever been there, it's a 3 hour ride from Phoenix to Flagstaff. So we all stripped down to our underwear and drove to Flagstaff in the bus with all the windows down.
what a what a story.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
pretty
So
wild right
so there
there.
were there were a lot of glamorous moments like that. Again, this is not a
Right.
big budget football program. And we were flying 1950s era old airplanes, that had been retired
Mhm.
from airline usage, and so these were pretty sketchy planes.
Hopefully make it.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes like engines would go out while we're mid-flight, and so it was
Mhm.
pretty glamorous that way.
So, staying on the football subject, right?
Yeah.
So, what is the first play to come to mind where you just maybe leveled somebody or hit that touchdown block for somebody? What's that first play that comes into
Oh
mind? Can you
man,
walk us through it?
first play. I remember a lot of them. I don't know in what order. I
Just
think.
just the first
Yeah,
one that comes to mind. It doesn't
I
have to
think
be
the
the first one.
I think the one that comes to mind. It was a touchdown, and I made the key block. It was a screen pass, so I snapped the ball and kind of floated out to the left, and I had to block what would have been the cornerback, so the smaller, faster guys that were way more athletic than me. That didn't usually work out that well, but I was in the right position. I was in the right place at the right time. I made the block, and we scored a touchdown. And they had to carry the guy off the field that I blocked. And it didn't happen very many times, but my parents were in the crowd to see it, and so that made me feel really good. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
That's pretty
yeah.
epic, yeah. Good screenplay.
So
So you played center.
I was a center. Yep, yeah. That's all I ever played. Yeah, yeah,
That's pretty cool. So you
yeah.
guys, let's see, back in the '70s, that would still be, standard, what, I formations and stuff like that.
What
Under
was it?
center a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah, little bit of that. Sprint draw was becoming a thing. The game was starting to evolve, and there were a lot more passing plays, which which was really fun. And we had a guy in the backfield, quarterback and tailback actually, but he would go on and play 15 years in the NFL. So he
Wow.
was really really good, which made us really good. And so yeah, a lot of creativity, which was just really fun. I think what I love, I was talking to someone the other day. One of the things about playing football, especially offensive line, is that it's really, it's a core. If you know the game, it's a choreographed dance between, five 300-pound men. It's just a beautiful thing. People don't realize that that's what it is, but it is. It's like a
Oh,
choreographed dance.
absolutely.
And
Oh,
and
that's
if you know, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
I think that's pretty cool, man. Yeah, I love football. I played a little bit, and yeah, I coached it for a long time, and
Yep.
I just love football. I could
Yeah.
talk about it forever, and people are probably like, "Where are the motorcycles at in this episode?" We'll
Well,
get there later.
my son-in-law's college coach. My
Oh, nice.
my little brother played professionally for years. I have two nephews that played all through college. So yeah, it's kind of it runs in the family for sure.
Boy, that's pretty epic,
Yeah,
pun
yeah.
intended. So once you got out of college, you met that lady,
Yep. I
and
met.
what was that like? How did you go up to her? How did you swoon her? How did
Oh, it was terrible. I paid a price. I had seen her in the training room. She had gotten injured, so the first time I remember seeing her was in the training room, and she had come from gymnastics practice, and at the time, this is very non Title IX, but there was only one training room for all of the athletes on campus, and it was in the middle of the men's football locker room. So women had to come in there, and it's like a gauntlet. And she, it was the first and only
oh
time
yeah.
first and only time she went in the training room. But I saw this beautiful gymnast, and just really studly and not glamorous at all, but just like incredibly athletic. And that, so I was kind of struck. She will tell you, and it's not untrue, it's just not the first time I remember her. She will tell you that we've formally met at a campus Bible study, which is not untrue. But that time, I already knew who she was. I knew, you know,
You already had your eye on her.
yeah, meeting her was, officially was kind of a formality in my mind. So, so she was just what I remember about her. Saw her strolling across campus shortly thereafter, and again, this just kind of sealed it. She had sweats on. Her hands were full of chalk and blood. If you've been around a gymnast, they tear those calluses and such. It just kind of all mangled up, hair in a ponytail sideways, and she was wearing a T-shirt. And I remember the T-shirt. It said, "A woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle." And I just thought,
What?
she doesn't need a guy. She's just like, she was just very very secure that way. And I thought, that's a challenge that's worthy of my best effort. So in order to really get her attention, this is how stupid I was. So all this is going on, and all this is building up, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna first, before I ever like get to know her, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make her jealous by asking out her roommate, because she wasn't giving me enough attention. And so
Okay.
I did that, and then she found out, and it was more than 2 years before she would go out with me.
Oh
So
no.
yeah, yeah. So she kept me on ice for a little over 2 years, and finally said, all right, we'll go on a date." And and I had been pining away for her for 2 years. So
Oh man.
yeah,
So 2 years you were just consistent. Here we
yeah.
are. Hello. Yep.
Well, and we had a lot of the same circle of friends, and so we would do things in larger groups socially. But she didn't want to have anything to do with me, and she's very strong in her convictions, and if she makes up her mind, that's it. So it took a
Oh
while.
yeah. Yeah.
So,
So you kind of tickled on Bible study. So I had Lauren on the podcast a couple of episodes ago,
yeah,
and she works with you guys.
yeah.
And after that, she invited myself and Chris Bragg, aka Critter Modo, onto your guys' podcast.
Yeah.
And when we were coming on, she sent us a link. I think the video of your story
Oh,
was
yeah,
about 8 minutes
yeah,
ish.
yeah,
So you kind of touched. I think we'll really go through that video, and I'll put
yeah,
it in the show notes for people to go check out.
yeah.
But I think from what that video said within it to what you said about the Bible group is religion's been a very big part of your life.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
was that uprooted or not uprooted, but was that rooted within you from your parents from the start? Is it something
Uh,
you grew into?
yeah, yeah. My mom really planted that seed and nurtured that, and that was where she came from. My dad grew up in Cuba is kind of a nominally Catholic country. Historically, that's kind of part of the culture there. But yeah, it was really my mom who, she worked so hard, just would, this is in the 60s, and when you go to church you dress up. Well, anybody that knows anything about me knows that's one of the things I hate the most, is being told to dress up. But my mom would do that, and drag us all five of the Perez kids to church. And so I did it, like a lot of my friends did it, because that's what our parents expected of us. But I think everybody, you come to a point where if you grow up in that tradition, where you have to decide, do you do this because you believe it, or you do it because it's what your parents expect of you. And I went through that kind of process about the middle of my high school years, and I just realized, no, I do believe this, and so I'm going to do it for myself. And so yeah, she planted the seed, and then it grew. But then, so before I started Epik, I had spent 30 years as a pastor in local churches. So that was kind of my that was my profession, if you will, and churches in the Portland area, churches in California and in Colorado. So yeah, so that's where I came from. That's to be completely candid, that's what has really formed my just my approach to the work we do with Epik. Though we're not a Christian organization. I'm not even sure what that means. But I think the way I've always explained it is I'm compelled to do the work that I do because I think these are things that Jesus would care for, you know, justice, and, doing whatever you can to ease the trauma of people that are exploited, those kind of things. So I think I come into it from that perspective. And what I have found is it's one of the few areas, I think, in the world today where there's just a ton of common ground. There's a lot of people that, we believe different things. We come from different traditions and all of that, but we can all agree, and this would be true of Republicans and Democrats, like we can all agree that people shouldn't be bought and sold and exploited the way they are. And
Right.
so it's what I have found is a really cool community of people that I might not have otherwise met if I had stayed behind the walls of the church.
It's a pretty fascinating story, and I
Yeah,
again I kind of want to back it up a little bit here
yeah,
because you were saying in high school is kind of where you found your groove with the religion, where you were like, hey, I'm buying in, I'm all in,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
all into it. And then when you said you changed your major from forestry or whatever,
yeah, yeah.
and so what did you change it to? And then also kind of piggyback onto that is, at what point did you realize that you wanted to be a pastor and
Yeah.
set you down? that educational path?
So I changed my major from, I think technically it was wildlife biology was the major I was on. And when I realized that that's not what I really wanted to do, I changed it to social work. It seemed like from what what little, back in those days, you didn't get a lot of guidance from people in the school. As long as you're, writing tuition checks, they didn't care. You could be there 10 years. And they're happy with that. But I found my way to social work. I've always been fascinated with how um, communities and systems work or don't work, and that's really kind of that's the core of what social work is about. Um, so I changed my major there, and then as I progressed through college, I still was really connected with the church that I had grown up with in Illinois, and it was just the idea of being a pastor was something that had always been held up as something worth something. And something worthy of kind of aspiring to. And I I've always just enjoyed people and being connected to people, and many times like just I find myself in a position of leadership, and so I mean all that stuff kind of fit, and so that's what I did. I look back on it now, like we look on all of our decisions like, man, there's so much I didn't know about what I was getting into, but it fit me at the time, and I spent 30 years doing it, working in churches, communities of wonderful people, some of whom became lifelong friends, and it worked until it until it didn't. And I'm leading up to the video that you referenced earlier. I can go there if you want. I kind of
Well,
build that
let's
story.
still got a couple questions
Okay.
with that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you decided like, hey, I'm going to do this, um, I'm actually really curious about this. Is it a? Do you feel like it was a calling? Like this is I'm being called to do this. Was it like, man, I just love to help people,
Yeah.
and this is a way that I can step into a role of some sort of leadership and help people, or was it just kind of a combination?
I think it was a combination. I think the idea of calling, I know that concept gets thrown around a lot, and people talk about it. I think there were moments where I felt like, yeah, this is. I think what I've come to understand about the idea of calling is it's that point at which you go, whatever it is you're doing is like, this is mine to do. Kind of like if I don't do it in the way that I'm uniquely able to do this particular thing, this particular job, then no one else is going to do it like I can do it. And so I felt there is some of that, um, but it's also it's just like, hey, I see people, the people that are hurting, and I want to do what I can to help build healthier communities. And I did see, to be fair, I did see a lot of that happening uh, in churches that I was around. It did seem like there was a real genuine desire within those communities to build, not just within the communities, but outside the walls of the church to, build healthier communities for everybody. It wasn't always the case, but so it was a mix. It was some of it was calling, some of it was like, this is an area I know I could probably make a difference, so I'm going to do it. It wasn't all that mystical, I can tell you that. It wasn't like the clouds parted and the sun beaming down on me and I heard the heard the voice of God. It wasn't like that. Um, so
Yeah. So how long did it take you to study before you got into? I guess you weren't. You had to do like a junior pastor or something first.
no, well,
Or was it direct in?
I went to graduate school and I studied a graduate degree in theology. And so that was like about 3 years of training. While I was doing that, I was working in a church as well. I was a youth pastor. So I was working with students. And, a lot of that a lot of that just simply meant hanging out with kids, and listening to them talk about their lives and trying to be an encouragement, and playing dodgeball. That's because that's what youth pastors do. We wrote the book on dodgeball. So I did that, and got to work with. Over the years, probably thousands of kids. I was in larger churches, and we would have youth groups regularly. We've had several hundred kids a week that would be a part of the events that I would create and kind of curate, and camps, summer
Wow.
camps. Did a lot of that, and yeah, and I loved it. And it's, what's cool is those many of those kids. I still call them kids. They're grandparents now themselves. They're grown adults, but we're still really good friends. One of my dearest friends, I've known him since he was in seventh grade, is now a 3-star general in the Air Force, and
Wow.
the current commander of Vandenberg Space Force Base. And in my mind, Doug was one of our kids, but he's this incredibly accomplished, military officer, and the rest of them. Some of the rest of them are, they're just they've raised their kids, and now their kids are having kids, and it's kind of a weird thing. But kind of back to what we said earlier, these are friendships that have lasted, and I love that more than anything else. Just being able to have those
Mhm.
connections with people over time.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty positive thing. I know that um, for me, coaching football for a long time, you're in kind of that leadership positive role,
Yep.
and one of the things with the school I was at that I didn't realize when I was there, that 51% of that community was either at or below the poverty line.
Wow. Wow.
So, when I was in there, I didn't realize that for the first couple of years. And then I think we're in the locker room, the coach's locker room. We were kind of talking, and that came up, and I was like, "Wait, what? Like, really?"
Uh,
And they're like, "Yeah, that's why some of these kids, I mean, they just don't eat." So we started like this food locker program and stuff. I believe
yeah.
it's still going on,
Oh
but
wow.
it you talk about kids and stuff. It's like I'm starting to see these my football players from like when I first started, and then they have kids that are
Yeah.
grown, and I'm just like, "Wait, you're
Yeah.
just a little baby face little kid, and now you're a husband and you have 3
Yeah.
kids and this and that." It's just it's pretty wild to go through and just see that entire group of kids just like you said, you still see them as kids, but you see them now and they're like 30,
They're grown
you
grown
know?
adults. Yeah. Well, I think that's it's true. Definitely true with sports. I think it's true with art and music as well. Like you as a teacher, as a coach, as a mentor, whatever, like you adults have a really unique opportunity to influence a young life, and that's such a privilege. But what I like, I've always known that, but what I've come to realize as I've gotten older is that privilege, goes both ways, because those people have an effect on us too. It's not
Oh, yeah.
just we're not there as these benevolent, gracious adults bestowing wisdom upon kids. It's like they're good medicine for us too. Um,
Absolutely.
I can remember because I coached high school football for a while too, and I love being on the sideline, and when you put the kid out there to do the thing you spent a week teaching him how to do, and he does it, and he looks back at you like, "Holy crap, that worked!" Like, yeah, that's win or lose. Those are the real like victories. You know if you're a coach, is when
Yeah,
they learn, when the kids learn and execute. And so,
absolutely. Football is a series of life lessons 1 yard at a
oh
time.
yeah, yep,
Yeah,
yep,
I love
yeah,
it. That's what our
yeah,
head coach used to say. I was just like, "I like that."
yeah.
So, moving on to, when did you start running, like, your church? Like, you were the pastor of that church? What was your first one?
I started a church when I was 29.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and it was grew quickly, and I had no idea what I was doing. I got by because I'm pretty consistent relationally. Like I just build healthy relationships, but in terms of like what it takes to run an organization, because at that level, that's what it becomes. A lot of like I had no idea what I was doing, but I was 29. Had so I think I had all three uh, of my daughters, and they were little. And so they grew up as pastors' kids, and they could talk for hours about that whole experience, growing up in that
I
culture.
bet.
But yeah, yeah. So yeah, so from 29 to 50, I was doing that work in various places, various settings. So
Well,
it was a long time.
that's a pretty long time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Where was your first church at that you started there when you were 29?
I was here in Vancouver, Washington, where I live. Yeah,
Oh, up in the Couve.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then did you just stay in the area for a while? You said you
Stayed
ran a
stayed in
couple
the area for
around.
a while, and then went to Colorado for several years, and then came back here um, after about 5 years. So it's been most of the last 25 or 30 years here in the Portland area. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I know I think when I was on your podcast, you're actually in Montana.
I was.
You
Yep,
live
we're in
there.
our
Yep.
family cabin in Montana. Right, it's funny.
Sweet.
Right after we finished that podcast, my wife comes in the cabin and she looks at me. She goes, "You got to see this." We're running outside, and there was a wall of flame across the lake from us. There's a huge fire blew up that day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and we spent the next week waiting for evacuation orders and dealing with this hellish smoke from the fires. But it was right after right after we all signed off. I went outside like, oh my gosh, it was a hellscape.
Oh man. Well, I knew it was a good podcast, but I didn't realize it was that hot.
Yeah, it was hot. Yeah. Oh man, we are dad jokes right there, boy.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Yeah.
pretty neat. So throughout that video, let's start diving into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So um it's actually a pretty interesting. I'll let you do it, but like I said, I'll put it in the show notes if you want to see the OG
Yeah.
version of it.
Yeah. It's really the story of how I got into the work I'm doing now with Epic. I was at a church in Colorado. Um, I was checking all the boxes of this young, dynamic, charismatic, mega church leader. Kind of it was the model I had grown up on. Like if you're really successful, there's certain things that will start to happen for you, and they were happening for me. And I'm like, wow, this is like this is really cool. I was approaching 40, I think, at the time, and and so from a sense of identity, like, and I think it's true of anybody in any career, like when you feel like you're really kind of hitting on all cylinders, like you're in your groove, and like, man, I felt really solid as a man because I had a successful career and I was taking care of my family, and the fact that it was sunny Colorado, helped because I just love the mountains, and in the midst of that, and completely blindsided, I was abruptly fired, and so within a matter of a couple of days, I like all of the. So what happened was I was fired, and the church was very paranoid about perception, and they tried to really control the narrative and make sure that the story that they wanted to tell got told. And so they really kind of clamped down on me and my ability to say what was going on. And so part of that meant they basically cut me off from the community. They said, don't talk to anyone, and we'll tell the story, basically, is what they said. And in order to do that, they had to kind of buy my silence. So they offered me a severance. And the not so, veiled threat was that if I said anything, they would withdraw the income that I needed, because I had just been fired. And there's no in the in the nonprofit, not in the nonprofit, in the church world, you don't necessarily get unemployment. That may be different now, but I needed the income, and so anyway. So I went in a matter of days from feeling like I was really, achieving something as a man and providing for my family and doing all of that, to being completely isolated from the community that I had built, all the friends that I had built, and not having any income. I didn't have a job. And so all of the markers for manhood and masculinity just got stripped away from me, and I felt useless. And what happened, and this is long, this is years now, and kind of in the wake of that, but I struggled to figure out, okay, what does it mean for me to be a man now? I had spent, I had always, even after college, I continued to exercise, but now I did a lot of running. I really enjoyed running, even though I'm, not built like a runner. So I kept doing that really as a way of survival and self-care. I just needed to do that to stay sane. But in the midst of doing that, they had been going for years, but I finally shredded the interior of both of my hip joints. And so I could barely, it wasn't long before I could barely walk. So I thought I was a successful man, because I had a successful career. I'd always prided myself on being really physically strong and capable. And now I could barely, I shuffled. If you would have seen me, I shuffled around the grocery store. I leaned on the cart because I couldn't bear the full weight on my hips. And, that was a 10-year, struggle with that before I would
10 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I would eventually have both of my hips replaced, excuse me, before I turned 50. So during that time, like I said, all of the markers of what it meant to be a man just all got stripped away, and experienced a ton of, it was eventually diagnosed as depression. I didn't see it as such in the middle of it, but it was depression. It was chronic pain. It was, I would take every kind of pain pill I could get my hands on to just get through the day. And then I couldn't sleep at night because I'd be in so much pain because I couldn't take any more pain pills. And it's just this vicious cycle of, pills to help me sleep, coffee to help me stay awake. And it was awful. So again, all of that, it's like, I didn't know where I was as a man. And towards the end of that long season, and I'm describing a 10-year period of my life, but towards the end of that season, a friend had said, "Hey, I want you to come hear this woman speak at an event here in Vancouver," and went. And she was a former U.S. Congresswoman from my district who had learned about trafficking, sex trafficking in India, and was so compelled to do something. She's very much an activist. She started an organization, still going now, 25 years later. It's called Shared Hope. But I heard her talk about it, and I heard her talk about how it was happening right in our own community. And I was like, you gotta tell me what to do. And so I literally cornered her in the hallway. I laugh about it now because I'm twice her size easily, and I can be pretty intense when I'm like, I got to take action. And she kind of stiff armed me a little bit and said, "Whoa, slow down." But what that conversation led to was, she said, "Hey, if you can figure out a way to get men's attention around this issue, That'd be really helpful. So, and this was all like as a volunteer. So I said, all right, I'm going to organize a motorcycle rally. I had at the time a 2005 Honda VTX 1800, not a
Oh,
Harley,
wow.
but a big,
That's
fast
big.
cruiser. Anyway,
Hmm.
so I spent several months recruiting, reaching out to, folks in the biker community, and we, the day of the event, we met outside the Rose Garden in downtown Portland, and we had
Beautiful.
speakers. We had, there was, I don't know, probably a couple hundred people. Um, and
Wow.
we, Linda Smith, the gal that started Shared Hope, she spoke a little bit, but we had press there and everything. And then we got on the bikes with a police escort and headed north on I-5. And by the time we got out on the freeway, it was, it's probably half a mile long of bikes. And the lead vehicle was a full size 53-foot semi with a banner on both sides that said "Kids are not for sale." And so we just literally rode straight up I-5 to the Montlake exit in downtown Seattle and ended underneath Husky Stadium at the University of Washington. And so that was my first first event. I did it as a volunteer. And I thought I was done, but by that time I'd realized there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. And I am an activist. And so I figured I'm going to just spend some time learning about this issue. So I did. I learned about how women and kids, boys and girls that are vulnerable are targeted and groomed and exploited in trafficking. And I'm a dad, right? And I was a youth pastor. I had worked with hundreds and hundreds of kids, and so I had to do something. But what was happening in my head, and I only discovered this after the fact, was it was kind of a way for me to rebuild my sense of masculinity, because I'm going to be the guy that rescues all these kids. And that was kind of what drove me until I got to really know several survivors of trafficking and advocates, women that work alongside these survivors. Um, and as I got to know them and got to hear their stories, something was missing there, and I started to realize that, number one, these women had way more power and toughness and ability than I ever gave them credit for. To survive a day in that life takes more than I think most men have. And so I began to see that, and this was brought to my attention by a friend who was an advocate, because I was talking with her one day. I'm saying, hey, men have to rise up, and we have to go out and we have to protect and save the women, and we got to show up and be the heroes, be the rescuers, all that kind of stuff, using that kind of language. We are the protectors, I think I said to her. And she stopped me and said, I got to stop you there. I said, she said, do you realize that the way you're talking right now is exactly how pimps talk to their victims? They're the ones that have the power. They're the ones that have the strength. They're the ones that can control everything. And that's part of the kind of the brainwashing that they use. They're able to convince these vulnerable women that they're they're the ones with all the power. And that's exactly how I was communicating. And it rocked my world, that realization. So here I was, I'd started into this work to try to reclaim my sense of masculinity, by rescuing, these poor trafficking victims. And in a very ironic way, it was the victims of trafficking that kind of rescued me from what I just have come to realize is a kind of faulty way of viewing who we are as men. And
Yeah.
those women and those stories have continued to impact me and shape me. It doesn't mean that, certainly doesn't mean that there isn't a role for men to play. I can get into that, but that was my story. So I was stripped of all of the kind of the masculine markers that we're taught that, define us as men. And it was, it's just, to me, it's just a really, really beautiful irony that is women, and women specifically, who have seen the worst of men, who have, for me personally, they have called out something better in me. I never saw that coming. It's just, I continue to just marvel at that. I was in Edmonton, Alberta last weekend, and got to be in the company of a community of Canadian Indigenous survivors of sex trafficking, um, and learned so much just from their stories, and hearing, the wisdom, very hard earned wisdom, that they bring into the world. So it's still, like, yeah, I could go in a bunch of different directions on that. So
Yeah, well, we'll reel a little bit in because one thing that I'm hearing from you that's very similar to Lauren is when you guys were both just starting, you both just kind of had this idea. You're like, I need to go protect the women, and she's was just like, I'm going to ride over and just start taking pictures at women's shelters.
yeah,
And both are just they weren't wrong. They had to have somebody who was trafficked to go time out. No, and this is why. So I
yeah,
find that a little remarkable that both of your stories have a very, very similar situation to make you guys realize, oh, we need to kind of veer off and maybe do it a little bit this way,
yeah, yeah.
change things a little bit. So, what was that like? I think once you get into like, okay, this is what I want to do, right? And you did that rally. And I gotta tell you, I did a moto event over the summer, and it was a lot of work, and it wasn't
Yeah,
anything like what you just did. Like, I cannot imagine, like, I mean, you had the big truck going down the road, you had banners made, you had all these people, and you had, like, 2 different locations, a lot of logistics involved,
yeah.
was that just, like, something you woke up one day and you're just like, "Yep, I'm doing it."
Yeah,
It just
that kind of thing is, it's typical for me, not because I'm a real careful planner and really good with logistics and all that. I kind of suck at that, but what I'm really good at is coming up with a crazy idea that maybe someone hasn't thought of before, and I can talk enough people, and enough of the right people into getting on board with me, that I can usually pull it off once or twice. And so I did, like with the motorcycle rally. So yeah, but I mean, that whole idea really evolved, and that's actually where Lauren and I, really was one of our first kind of projects together. We started doing those kind of events together, after I had had that experience that I described, and after Lauren had kind of had her first, kind of foray into this work. We started partnering together on motorcycle events, and so we did the. I think we did it for 3 years. We called it the Fast Ride, Fight Against Sex Trafficking. So it's called the Fast Ride, and in a couple different locations. And we would, we'd have a route, we'd have an event venue, we'd, do all the promotion, publicity. And this is an example of how I can find people who are really gifted, and get them excited. Like Lauren's the example of that. She's so good at partnerships and promotion and media and all of that. So we did several of those. We rebuilt bikes and auctioned them off for, the money all went to a variety of survivor focused initiatives. With the last one we did was in Sturgis. Actually, it wasn't the last one. I think the second one we did was in Sturgis. So we were invited by the city of Sturgis to come during the rally and do an event there, and so we did that. But by that time, I had Lauren, and there's probably a million things that she thought of and made sure got done that I didn't even know needed to be done.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, so we've come back from that Honda 50. Now we're back to motorcycles again. There's an arc there.
There
In
is an arc.
there is an
So
arc.
why
Yeah.
don't So let's fill that arc in with the motorcycles. I got some other things that I got to keep in mind that I want to ask you, but
Yeah,
let's just kind of fill it in about some motorcycles right there. So you got the 50 to the big bike, the 1800.
yeah.
So
Well, there's a
fill that
couple
in.
in between there. So the first bike I ever bought was a 1978 Goldwing, Honda Goldwing,
Oh
uh,
wow.
but it was a stripped down or partially stripped down, and those bikes without the bags and the fairing were really cool looking bikes. So I was in the process trying to figure out how to rebuild it. It was drivable, but it needed a lot of work. Um, and this was when I lived in Colorado when I was still a pastor. And so I had this bike in my garage. Um, I was at church one Sunday, and a guy who I had known, he's older guy, retired cop, shook my hand, said hi, and when he pulled my hand away, there was this key in the palm of my hand, and I looked down at it, and I can remember it said Honda Goldwing 25th Anniversary Edition. He goes, "Go take it for a drive." And I was in the parking lot, and I walked out, and it's just this wine red 1995 Honda Goldwing. And I took it for a drive, and I was just like, this is so cool. Big, you know,
Yeah.
clumsy, but really smooth bike. And anyway, the short version of that long story, less than a year later, he died. He died suddenly of a heart attack. And I got the call from his wife that night. She was in the hospital to tell me that Bill had died, and and then said, "But he wanted you to have the bike."
Oh, no
So
way.
yeah, so he made it clear to his wife that I was to inherit that bike. So I had that bike for several years, and yeah, just loved it. Definitely not it's not a Harley. it's
No.
it's it's the antithesis of a Harley. So that was the first real like functioning motorcycle I had. And then um, I when my hips fell apart, I couldn't even get the thing off the kickstand, so I had to sell it. And I was unemployed, and we needed the money, so I had to sell that, which broke my heart. When I got healthy again, I talked my wife into letting me get a bike, so I got the VTX. Started riding again, and then went from that to a 2004 Harley Road King Police Edition that I
Nice.
found here in Vancouver, starting to rust in a barn out in the country, and it's a really low miles. But bought that, fell in love with Harleys. Just there's something so mechanical about them, and going from a
Hold up.
Goldwing, yeah,
Hold up here. Hold up. You had the Road King Police Edition.
yeah.
Was it black and white?
It was black. It wasn't black and white. It was black.
Okay, because there was this guy I would pass every so often on a black and white Road King Police Edition,
Oh,
and I would just be
in
cruising
Portland.
around. I'd be like, "No way, if that was you,
Yeah,
that'd be
yeah.
insane."
No, it was just all black, which is really
Okay.
the best color for a Harley. I don't care what anybody else says.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
so I had that, and I just loved it. Did my first iron butt on that. Did
Nice.
1,100 miles in 18 hours or something like that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you got after it.
Yeah. We drove from Vancouver to Pocatello, Idaho, and back. So
Nice.
yeah, it was quite an adventure. Anyway, um, but then when we so I had that after I started Epic, and I used it for a lot of these events, and then we got the call to go to Sturgis, and we at the time had also, and this is all the credit goes to Lauren on this one. She had gotten Indian Motorcycle to donate a brand new bike this time that we would customize and auction off, and the funds would go to survivors. So we're all excited about the event coming. And my brother called me. He lives in Kansas City, and he called me, and he hates Harleys, just hated them at the time. And I'm driving a Harley, and I was going to go on my Harley to Sturgis, and he goes, you can't do that. I just won't let you. And he's owns a construction company, and had a really good year. And he sends me a picture of a two-tone tan and white, or tan and red, uh, 2015 Indian Roadmaster with the tan leather saddle, and just beautiful big 900-pound bike. And he goes, I got this for you. I want you to have
What?
I want you to have this bike. And so yeah, so if you're counting so far, I have it's crazy, it's stupid. I have been given two beautiful motorcycles in my lifetime. I don't deserve one. But yeah, it was used, but he got it from the Sturgis dealership that we were working with. So I picked it up in Sturgis, and still have it. It's in my garage. And I sold kind of horse traded the Harley to one of my best friends, so it's still around. I still ride it from time to time.
It's rad.
So yeah, yeah,
That is super rad.
yeah.
So what was that like? I mean, you just hop on that big bird and just took off, and was it just like night and day over the other bikes, or was it just
It's the
really
so
getting
fun.
used to it? Because I
Yeah,
know I had a Vulcan 1600 for a minute,
that's it. Yeah.
and I gotta tell you, that bike was terrible. It
Oh,
was
really?
like your counter steering. It was like, I'm exaggerating, of course, but it was almost like you had to take your feet off the pegs and put it like on the bars and push as hard as you can just to
Just
counter steer correctly.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you wrestled it into the corner, and you had to wrestle it out of the corner. And by the end of like 400 or 500 miles or whatever, you're just like, I'm so
Exhausting. Yeah.
tired. Yeah.
Well, having had a Goldwing and a Road King, the the Indian Roadmaster is the sweet spot between the two of them. It
Oh,
really
okay.
is. Yeah, it still has, it's much, the older, I think it's the Evo motor on the Harleys of that era. They just, when you come to stop sign, that they shake, they vibrate so much. It's just the design of the motor. Um, as soon as you pull away, everything smooths out. But it's a very kind of mechanical feeling. The Goldwing, you almost don't even hear the motor sometimes.
Right.
So the Indian is kind of the sweet spot right in the middle. But when I got it, we were at our cabin, which we talked about earlier. We'd spent an extended time out there, and this was before the rally. So I flew, bought a one-way ticket from Helena, Montana to Rapid City. Um, and then one of the guys from the Sturgis dealership came and picked me up and brought me to the dealership. I picked up the bike that day and started riding home, and it's 650 miles, and it just flew by. I did 650 miles the first day I had the bike, and I was just in heaven. So, and
Just
it was so comfortable. I was passing a kidney stone while riding from Sturgis back to Montana, but it didn't matter. It was it was so smooth. So
passing the kidney stone. You're like, "Oh, I'm just gonna keep riding."
yeah, I'm just gonna
That's
keep riding.
crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, man, and 650 miles. I mean, you just, you rode just far enough for that first break-in oil change.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it was great, and
Mm.
I'm sure everybody that has a motorcycle has this experience where you just don't get to ride it enough, and you go in the garage and it's like it's mocking you because you can't ride today, and it's just sitting there. And it happens to me every morning. I go out there.
Mhm.
So
Oh, yeah, you're like, "Hey, how you doing?"
yeah.
Yeah, I actually, when I go off to work in the morning and stuff, I go through the garage and I see the bike, and the new bike doesn't have a name yet, so I'm at
What
it
did you get?
Tomas or whatever. I got another Honda Africa Twin. I got the 2024,
Oh,
but I
those are
didn't
beautiful.
get the Adventure Sport model because they have a 19-inch front wheel to try to keep up with the GS, I guess. So you can't get the some of the features and stuff, like the added fuel tank, or the bigger fuel tank with, like, what was it, 6.4 gallons? I have 5,
Okay.
and I got to tell you, I'm not impressed with the fuel mileage I'm getting right now either.
Oh, really?
'Cause I was, yeah, I mean, I'm a little, I have this, I joke around and say I have this disease. It's called brapitis, and
Yeah.
I just like brap, and we do a lot of the riding off road,
Hmm.
adventure style, but I put knobbies on it, so you're gonna lower your fuel economy right there.
Yeah.
Plus, you add in a little brappy brap, and just kind of the way I like to ride is, get a little squirrely around corners and have fun, and do that kind of stuff. And I was around 200 miles or so with the my 2021 Adventure Sport Africa Twin, and I was thinking, oh, I'll be down about maybe 150, 60, maybe 170 or something around there.
Yeah.
I'm filling up like 135 miles.
Oh,
And I'm
wow.
just like, oh no.
Yeah.
That's the only downfall of it. Other than that, the bike is amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Those
love
are
it.
beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
I picked up, it's like a '08 or '09 GS a couple of years ago. So I also have that in my garage, but it's not near as fast and smooth as the Africa Twins.
Well, the GS is kind of the end all be all anymore for,
Yeah, this
I
is
don't know,
just
touring kind of riding.
yeah. I love it. It's so different too.
Mhm.
That you get on a 400-pound bike when you're used to riding a 900-pound bike. It's quite a difference.
Oh, just a little bit. What size is that GS? Would that be
It's a
back then? Would that
1200.
it's
It's a
the 12?
1200.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the first or second year they bumped it up to the 1200. No, maybe no, it was third or fourth year, I think.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Because they're
but
at the
yeah, I mean,
1300 now.
or yeah, yeah, and with like I don't know,
Yeah, they
20-gallon tanks. It looks like
Oh, I know.
big, big,
I think
wide.
it's 8. I think it's 8
Yeah,
gallons or
yeah,
something like that. My buddy Sean has the GS 1250, and I specifically remember one time I think we were coming out of Canada, and I had to fill up, and he's like, "Nope, I'm good. I'll make it all the way
yeah,
home." I'm like, "Yeah,
yeah,
whatever."
yeah. Mine is just the GS and not the Adventure. But even that, I get 200, maybe two and a quarter on a
Mhm.
tank, depending on how hard I'm riding it.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, getting 200, two and a quarter, that's good, especially when you're off road.
yeah,
You kinda getting out there and stuff. I'm a little worried about with, some of the trips that I've got scheduled this year, kinda worried about that reach, so
yeah,
good thing I have a fuel bag ready to
yep,
go, just strap on and give me an extra gallon, right?
yeah.
So,
That's all you need. That's great.
yeah. So
Yeah.
what made you get the 1800? That's a big jump, from those
The
2 bikes.
the Indian.
No, the VTX.
Oh, it was more affordable than a Harley. It's,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
and it's a shaft drive, liquid cooled Honda, and it was just like I hadn't yet learned the how much fun, and I didn't have the confidence at the time to experience how much fun it could be to wrench on your own bikes. You know,
Right. Yeah.
and I've learned that slowly, but I had my kids were younger and still in middle school and high school too, and so we had obligations like volleyball practice and soccer tournaments, and I didn't have a lot of time to work on a bike. So I actually I had two of those over the years. They're great. They're great for what most people use them for. It's kind of Saturday rides,
Mhm.
but they have about it 3/4 of an inch of travel. So
Oh, no.
in their suspension, so I can see the shocks there, but I think it's just for looks because there's the ride is really harsh. But they're fast. They'll outrun any Harley. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
speaking of suspension, my dad had a 19, I can't remember, I wanna say 45 flathead Harley,
Oh
and it was
wow.
the hardtail. And he was like, I think I still have bad back because of that bike because it didn't have a seat on it. So he just went out to the garage, found a piece of plywood, and cut it in the shape of a seat and put it on there.
Oh
And that was his
gosh.
seat on a
Ugh,
hardtail.
on a hardtail. Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what's ironic about Harleys. They have, they have the soft tail, and I did a 3,000-mile trip on a soft tail, and there's nothing soft about a soft tail. That triggered another kidney stone. There's another arc there. Uh,
Oh, geez.
Kidney stones. Yeah.
This,
Yeah.
oh, kidney stones are, yeah, I had one. That was enough.
Well,
That's
I
about
had
it.
I had here's and it overlaps with motorcycles. I was with my friend who now has my old Harley. We did a 3-day trip back roads in Oregon. Had just this sublime experience out in the desert there. I think in 700 miles, we maybe had to pass 2 dozen vehicles, just empty roads. And our last night was in Bend, and I had that familiar feeling again, like I had a kidney stone. It got so bad in the middle of the night, I had to go to the ER. I couldn't even put my shoes on, barely make it out the door. I Ubered to the ER, and they kind of got things calmed down. I didn't, the stone was still there, but gave me some meds, sent me back to the Airbnb where we were at, slept for, I don't know, an hour and a half, been up all night. And then I had to time it with my pain meds, rode on my Indian all the way back to Vancouver. And that's a, 3.5, 4 hour ride. So I had to ride back with a kidney stone passing, which never passed.
Oh, man.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I can sympathize with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
So the kidney stones suck. That's all I know. Drink
yeah.
more water.
Yeah,
Lemon
for
water.
sure.
Right?
Yeah. Been told
So
that many times.
yeah, mine was terrible. I did a thing with I'm not gonna get too far into it because mine was a kind of a catastrophe, but I ended up staying home from work one day and I just wasn't feeling well and I had some kidney pain and it was just kind of chalked up as just maybe a flu or something, right? And then like the next day or 2 days later or whatever it was, completely okay.
Hmm.
I totally forgot about it. Everything was fine. Whatever. 6 months later is when it decided to actually come out. So what happened is I had the little stone and it was trying to pass,
Yeah.
and it went in just far enough into the urethra that it allowed everything around unrestricted, but then it was starting to grow, like the little whatever started growing around it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it was terrible. It
Yeah.
was
Well,
yeah,
that
it was gnarly.
episode for me in Bend, the follow up with the doctors revealed that I had a tumor. I ended up having cancer, and had they had actually had to take the kidney out. So I
Oh
had
Jesus.
cancer surgery a couple years ago, and the doctor said, she goes, your right kidney was a bag of rocks. There were so many in there.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
so yeah, so it was actually good because it forced me to go into the doctor and have a closer look. And so yeah, so I had surgery and they removed my kidney. Now I don't have. It feels great. I pull to the right a little bit when I walk, but other than that, I'm good.
Full to
So
the right.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I love it.
yeah.
Man.
So
Okay. So back to the serious stuff.
yeah,
So now we're getting back to you're working with trafficked people.
uh-huh.
I don't know if that's the correct term, but we're
Yeah,
going with that.
yeah.
Um what was it like? Maybe walk us through the people that we aren't around that because one of the things that really opened up my mind and well, opened up my eyes is I had a thought of what trafficking was and what it is and what it really is are polar opposites.
Yeah.
So as a truck driver, we have TAT, Truckers Against Trafficking.
Yep. Yep.
and we have a lot of, you'll see a lot of the stickers on trucks. Some of the mega carriers are really involved with it.
Yeah,
I've noticed, rest areas, they have little signs and,
in the
the stalls or
bathrooms.
the urinals or whatever, and phone numbers and all this information. Well, to me, all these years that and the stories that I would hear, that is like kidnapping. We're
Mhm.
taking you, and this is the way that's going to be, right?
Yeah.
And I know that there was a story, um, maybe like 5 years ago, of a truck driver at a Pilot truck stop. I know it was at a Pilot. I don't remember where in the country it was, but a motorhome was somewhere in the vicinity of his eyesight. Um, It was there for a little bit. A lot of different people coming and going out of there. So
Mm.
his radar was up a little bit, I think. And then something happened to where like a window on the side, like a curtain was moved, and he saw somebody pretty young in there
Yeah.
and went back. So he called the cops. The police came, ended up being a kidnap trafficking situation.
Wow.
Um, and that was always being around that. That's what trafficking was. I felt like that's what Tat actually promotes. I might be completely wrong, but my perception of what I've always read, seen from them, it was, you know, keep your eye out for people that are being trafficked. And in my
Yeah.
mind, I was like, kidnapped, So I
Yeah.
was always worried about, my nieces, for example,
Sure. Sure.
getting in with that or whatever. But then when Lauren was on and she was talking about stuff, I was like, wait, it's just like the boyfriend kind
Yeah.
of steers you into that or whatever. And I was like, I was blown away. It took me like 2.5 days to kind of like decompress from that
Yeah.
episode.
I think Truckers Against Trafficking has done some really good work, and what they have, and I knew the founder of the organization, and what she saw with respect to the trucking industry is you guys are often um, in places and in transit, um, in along travel routes, obviously like interstates, that are also being used by traffickers to move their victims from one point to another. So like you guys would likely intersect at places like truck stops. So that's not an unheard of scenario. But yeah, like what Lauren was referring to, it's often much more subtle than that. It's not the kidnap. It's not kidnapping. It's seduction. The boyfriend, an older guy will befriend oftentimes on social media. A lot of it, that's where that can start. That grooming starts, and they will just strike up a relationship and leverage the relational need and desire that a victim, that any person has. They'll leverage that and get them to, just buy into what they want them to do, to the point where eventually there's such a connection there where they have manipulated them so skillfully that they'll, a lot of times they'll just come to a point where they say, you know what, I spent a lot of money on you and we need to earn some of that back, and here's how you're going to do it. And so by this time, they're not at a truck stop. They could
Right.
be at a home or apartment anywhere, and so it kind of hides in plain sight. We don't realize that it's happening. Um, the other uh, the other form, and this is they've estimated this is 40% of actual trafficking victims now, are being trafficked by family members, by parents, that they're actually selling their kids. Like I said, I was in Canada this last weekend in Edmonton, and I met a gal who at 6 was being sexually abused by her dad. He was shooting her up with meth and selling her
Oh
to
my
his
God.
buddies for more drug money. So, and those are way more common than I think people realize. If you figure, that's an experience that 40% of trafficking victims have. So it's family members. It's not always a parent necessarily. It could be an older sibling, could be an aunt or an uncle. So it can happen that way. The thing that I've learned since I got into it, and this is the shift for me in my focus in this work, is the common denominator, whether they're kidnapped or whether they're seduced by a boyfriend or they're being trafficked by family members. The common denominator in all of those scenarios is men who want to buy sex and are willing to pay for it, and they don't really care where it comes from, whether their dad's delivering them, whether the boyfriend or the guy that's kidnapped them. That's the common denominator, and that's the conversation that doesn't happen often enough. We don't talk about the culture that has created, this mentality among statistically a small group of men, but it's very powerful, and it causes men to believe that this is something they're entitled to. And so a lot of, most of our work for the last 10 years at Epik has been directly confronting those men. We started a program in 2013 where we regularly post fake ads selling sex online. And when the guys call or when they text and think they're going to get this, young girl that they want to hook up with, they get one of our volunteers. And so all of a sudden they're talking to a man at that, we call it disruption at the point of sale. And so we've been doing that now since 2013. We've got teams of volunteer men that are doing this probably 20 or more nights a month in 20
Wow.
in 20 cities across North America. So and it's we've I think we're closing in on 300,000 attempts to purchase sex that we've logged, that we've recorded, and we have a a call center. Basically, we've created a national call center where the joke is we're the Jake from State Farm. If you remember that commercial a few years ago, just a bunch of guys in khakis, with headsets on, talking to
Yeah.
sex buyers. And it sounds, 300,000 sounds like a big number, but there's probably hundreds of millions of attempts online to try to purchase people every year. So it kind of feels like a drop in the bucket. But it's taught us a ton as men, and it's forced us to ask, I think, more important questions of our culture and our community. Like, who said this was what we should be doing, and who wants this? I think that to me, that's one of the most compelling questions now is who wants this for their world? Who wants this for their children, for their grandchildren? Um, and who's willing to say, no, this is not what we want. And so that's the space, I guess, that we are focused in, with Epik is kind of being in that mix. So we don't directly work with survivors. We collaborate with survivor groups very often. We lean into them for kind of technical assistance on, what is this life really like? And so we have a really phenomenal community of mostly women, but not all women. Survivors of sex trafficking, or kind of there are kind of our unofficial elders. These are the women we go to when we go, hey, does this situation make sense? Are we thinking right about this particular issue? And so we have this really, really cool connection with those folks.
It seems like a pretty powerful resource to have somebody like that on the backside,
Oh,
just to be able to go in and ask.
yeah. Well, that was the reason for my visit to Edmonton last weekend. The gal that was kind of curating this event, she herself she's done a ton of training for our guys, but she was actually in Canada, in Edmonton specifically. There is, even though it's technically illegal nationally, the city of Edmonton and other cities license these brothels. And our friend Andrea was in that system for like 9 years. She actually eventually ran her own brothel because she figured she could create a safer environment for the women. And so she's been on the inside of the commercial sex industry. She had a just this radical kind of epiphany when she realized one day that the entire business system that on the outside looks like, you got empowered women and it's just purely transactional, like it's good for everybody. She realized, because she was seeing it from the inside, it was destroying lives. And so she has become probably one of the leading voices in Canada for the eradication of that whole business system. And she's one of our mentors. Um, and so it's just real privilege to be there with her and half a dozen mostly Indigenous women, some of whom had lost their daughters. Who you may have heard of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women movement.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these folks had their daughters had been. Not all the murdered and missing Indigenous women are trafficking victims, but very often they are. And this one of the women who was there lost her daughter in 1997. Found her daughter in a field outside of Edmonton, where her body had been for a month before anybody saw it.
Oh,
So,
man.
Yeah.
So that's crazy.
Yeah.
Actually, it was up in Canada in September, and you were saying about that movement. I saw one of those billboards, and I was like, it struck my curiosity, and now it's funny that we kind of went back full circle to it.
There's some overlap there. Obviously, there's a cool group. They've been doing much bigger events at Sturgis the last few years. It's called Riding for MMIW, and they're doing like an annual thing. I want to get back to Sturgis to ride with them, but it's a bunch of primarily Native American women bikers, and their whole thing is to call attention to this very issue. So I'm trying to figure out a way to get back to Sturgis to be there to support them. I would love to ride my Indian with that community of women. I think that would be really cool.
That would be rad. You might have a pancake guy and an Africa twin following you with a bunch of camera gear documenting it.
I don't think they would care. I think they follow us on social media. We follow them. Really, really neat. I was going to say just ladies. I think it's primarily women, but I don't think it's exclusive. So yeah, check them out. This is really cool, and they're really starting to get networked with a lot of. What I saw recently was some Native American actors in support of that. So, yeah,
nice. I have to write down notes because I'm gonna have to put that in the show notes. And I realized when I was talking with Lauren, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna do this, this, and this." And I was like, "What time did she say that?" So what was it like for you? The very first time that you were around a survivor, what was? Because I just feel like that would be one of the most powerful moments.
Oh yeah,
of actually just being in the space with somebody and hearing their story.
Yeah. I had started Epik a couple of years prior. We had won a grant from a large church in Portland, a Imago Dei church, and they were just wonderful to us. And they gave me an office in the building, so I had a place to go and work. And in the same kind of a large campus in the same building, they were also sharing space with a survivor advocacy group that was working with trafficking victims. And the gal that ran it, her name was Esther. She has become one of my best friends in this work. She said, "Hey," she called me one day and she said, "Hey, we got a kid." I think she was 15 or 16 at the time. They had gotten her away from a really dangerous pimp who was threatening to kill her. They had they had found her a place in a residential treatment aftercare facility, which is critical for especially kids, but anybody coming out of that. They said, but it's out of state and we don't have enough money to get her there. And so I ran up to her office. I handed her my credit card. And I said, book the flight. And so she did. And then, maybe a week later, she called me and said, "Hey, I'm here with Jasmine. We're on our way to the airport. We've got FBI standing by, because they didn't know what this pimp was going to do. But before we go, Jasmine wanted to know, because she knew at that time that I had been a pastor. She said, can we come down? And before she goes, she wants to know if you would pray for her." And I'm like, yeah. So prior to this time, I had just been reading books about trafficking and going to task force meetings to learn about like what was happening, in Portland and the surrounding area. And it was all up in my head. I was doing, it's what I was taught. I was doing my homework. And it was actually my social work training, ironically. I was trying to understand the systems, but it was all very academic. So there's a knock on the door. Esther comes in, and behind her is this tiny teenage girl. I'm a big guy. She was just, she came up to like the middle of my chest. And it was summertime. And what I remember is seeing her, she was wearing a sundress, just kind of the thin straps, so bare shouldered. And what struck me about it was on her, what that had been, her left shoulder was a bruise the size of my hand. I have really big hands. So it wasn't, it was a bruise from somebody that had beat her up. And it just shook me. So I mumbled some lame prayer, I don't remember, and she thanked me, and they left. She went to the airport, but as soon as they walked out the door, I stumbled into a nearby stairwell and just started sobbing, because I had actually been in the presence of someone who had, nearly been killed by a trafficker. And so all of a sudden it became real for me. And it just, I saw in her, my daughters. I saw my daughter's friends. I saw, my friends when I was younger. Like I saw women, I think for the first time, as I realized this is the risk that women face all the time. Might not be trafficking, but it could be so many other forms of violence. And I had lived my whole life completely oblivious to that fear. I go anywhere. I'm not worried. I wouldn't, at this point in my life, I wouldn't outrun many people, but I'm still, it'd be hard to bring me down. I don't live with the fear of physical threat. And so just that experience and probably 100 since then, just being reminded of the fact that in this world every day, women have to contend with things that, that most men, we just don't even know to think about it. And I'm not trying to be down on men. It's just like, it's different for women. I've had these conversations with my wife. I've had them with my daughters now. They're all adults, and they understand it. Thankfully, they have, to my knowledge, they haven't, had to suffer this. But that was the thing that's another thing that was very chilling is 1 in 3, I believe the stat is 1 in 3 women will experience some form of sexual violence in their lifetime. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, crap, I have 3 daughters. You start doing the math, and how many people, how many women do we know? And if that, and I've heard that, that statistic verified over and over again, I think it's pretty reliable. If that's true, we know women who have, who've gone through this, and they haven't necessarily disclosed it to us. They're not, obligated to do that, but it's a different world for women. So that experience for me with Yasmin was it really shaped me. It just made me realize that this is something real that affects real women and girls every day. And men just we just don't, for the most part, we don't think about that. We have other things that occupy our time and create anxiety and tension for us. And again, I'm not down on guys, but that was real sobering experience.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine being in the presence of something like that.
Yeah.
Um, you say that, and the 1 in 3, right now I've got 2 female grandbabies,
Hmm.
so is it gonna be one of them? Is it I that's it puts a giant, I wanna say perspective, but I'm not real sure if that is it the actual term. It hits you inside in a way that you can't really describe,
Yeah.
my podcast with Angie Ball, her 19-year-old son committed suicide. So we had to talk about that, and I can relate to a little bit how you're saying, like, you just wanted to go down and break down and sob a little bit because I'm inside, I'm trying to conduct this podcast, but there were times things would happen,
Yeah.
she would talk and I was just speechless. Like, for the first time ever doing a podcast, I had to hit pause and regroup and then continue on,
Mm. Wow.
and I feel like that moment for me was maybe that moment for you, just
Yeah.
in that space with somebody like that. It's just, it's, I don't know. It's
I
this
think that
incredible, horrible feeling.
I think the challenge for men,
Mm.
still a challenge for me, like when you when you experience that, is to not look away. You
Yeah.
know, it just stand there and take it, because I think that's what women have to do. You know, but I think the impulse is to look away, right? The impulse is to go, let's talk about bikes.
Right.
And I know,
Right.
like, it's similar with you, like in the work you're
Mm.
doing, just in mental health and conversations around suicide. It's much easier to, like, let's just talk about our next trip. And that's a form of looking away. And so I think I think I've become more aware of when I feel that desire to want to look away and not deal with it. Um, and I think I'm a little bit better of kind of staying there and standing in it and looking at it and thinking about it. Um, that's hard work. I think that's why, like, I really appreciate what you guys do, um, and building, creating safe communities where people can, you do that together. It's not something you, as a man or as a human, I think that we're not made to just always deal with those hard things by ourselves. We do the hard work together, and I think that's where things change. Whether it's suicide prevention or anti-trafficking work or domestic violence. um, and I think if men can get better at not looking away and not trying to solve it on our own, um, I think we might actually make some progress.
That brings a question to my mind here, because I'm listening to what you're saying, and then how you worded, just like what I do and what Critter does with men's mental health, and the whole looking away part is, I think that's a pretty powerful way to say it. So I think, how am I going to word this here? Gotta adjust to my seat. Because I feel like our work, obviously yours is much further along, mine's very infant, but I almost feel like there's some sort of an interwoven twine between the two that connects the dots, because I think mentally healthy men probably don't make these choices, right? So
Yeah.
that's a little bit on my side. But then, how do we cross? Like, how do we make men understand that if you're in a bad spot, you're going to make bad choices, and your choices are probably going to go over to your work and deal with, you
Yeah.
know, going online. Maybe, one thing that Lauren talked about were like cam girls.
Hmm.
Those are trafficked people, and
Yeah.
like you're making those decisions, or you're going to a brothel or whatever.
Yeah.
So how would we what would be a good step for us to really put out that word to help men make different decisions in the culture? Because that's the thing that's hard with us. It's like we talk about men's mental health, and we're like, dude, you're not supposed to talk about that. Put it down. You're fine. Shut up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We want to create the healthy space to no, talk to me about it. Let's get help. Therapy's fine. It's good. It's healthy. So how do we cross this over to get out of that stigma, if you
Yeah.
will?
I think healthy decisions come from a healthy sense of who we are as people. If it, so it's I think before the decisions are made, the question is a sense of identity, and is it healthy? And so it's such a great question. And again, that arc of motorcycles. The guy I sold the Road King to is one of my best friends, Curtis. And Curtis, his whole work, he is by training a community psychologist, started his work in youth suicide prevention. But what he has taught us over the years is this idea of um, belonging, and not a sense of belonging, but a kind of a much deeper knowledge that we are connected to one another, that we are made to be in those kind of relationships, and healthy relationships. And when we are, it helps form a healthy sense of identity. And I learned this from Curtis. I think in a deeper way. It's stuff I had kind of known before, but Curtis taught me in a deeper way, and he did it through um, a process of. And again, you guys are doing this, like just what I have heard from you guys about the communities you're trying to build. It's storytelling. It's we tell our stories, and it isn't just, hey, you remember that that one time at band camp. It's not that
Yeah.
kind of storytelling, but it's telling stories about our lives, the things that impacted us, the things that are meaningful to us. But when you do it in a safe community of people, um, one of the things that happens is whether we're deliberate about it or not, we rely on the people that are hearing our stories to validate those stories, and to it can be as simple as, and that is so when you're telling a story, and to hear someone say back to you the way you experienced that situation, or the way you responded, whatever, like that's so you. I see that in you. What Curtis has done is take that process and made it just a little bit more intentional, to where he does this thing. We've done it. It's now a part of our training with Epik when we train new volunteers. It's called a 5-minute life story, and you go around. You literally have 5 minutes to tell your life story, and then kind of the second lap around that process is where each person will call something out from the other, that they see in the other person. And so you're affirming one another, saying, you know what, you are tenacious. You share a story about something, and you are a problem solver. I see that you are the problem solver. And so those are things that shape our identity, right? When someone that we trust says, I see this thing in you, and it's really good and beautiful and powerful, like that, those are the things, our parents, hopefully do that for us, but we need that stuff all our lives. So when you have I think this is like one of the greatest untapped things in the world of men is the power that men have to call out the good things that we see in one another. And so, and we do that through storytelling. And when it's done intentionally, it creates a sense of like, I belong here. I am connected to these people. These are, I think it was Critter who talked about when we did our podcast last summer. I think he talked about just that level of safety where like these are my. How did he say it? It was I think it was something around like these. This is my chosen family.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep. That's a term we use a lot.
yeah, and I think that's an
Mhm.
expression of what I'm talking about. We we can do that for each other, and that's just so powerful. I think as men, I know this is true for me in like my generation and the kind of the world I grew up in. When you become a man, part of what's implied in that statement is you don't need anybody. And I lived that way for a long time. I could do it myself. And it sometimes that's good. Sometimes you got to take a chance and take a risk and do it yourself. But um, I've tried to live that way longer than I ever should have, and it doesn't really produce anything all that useful. And when it gets pushed to the extreme, I think that's when you see that's when your sense of identity begins to break down, and I think that's when back to your earlier question, I think that's when bad decisions are made, and they look to exploit someone, to buy sex from someone as a way to kind of fill in that emptiness, or they get to the point where it's just nothing matters. We had a guy call into one of our teams. We call it a patrol, and this was a team in Fort Worth, Texas. Called in one night trying to hook up with a girl, and our guys are really super well trained. They're well trained and they're really intuitive at kind of reading the mood of the caller, and they could tell this guy was, something was wrong. But they'll just say, hey, we're not the gal you're calling for. We're just a bunch of guys, and I'm leaving a ton of details out. But this guy finally confessed to our volunteers. He said, I was gonna go on this date and then I was gonna kill myself. And so they just, the team is 4 or 5 guys that stopped everything, put it on speakerphone, and they're like, hey man, we're here for you. We care about you. You don't have to do this. Either of the two things you were going to do tonight, you don't have to do either of them. And it was so just that immediate, kind of ninja male community, something about, this guy showing up in that moment. The guy, like, they kind of literally talked him off the ledge. So much so that he called back 2 or 3 days later, and just to tell the volunteers, is, hey, I just want you to know I'm okay. They had sent him some resources, local like suicide prevention resources in the Fort Worth area. He had followed through. So that's like an extreme example, but that's where these things can overlap, right? He said,
Right.
I'm going to use someone to feel, to kind of fill in that void and to try to feel something. And then I'll probably just, kill myself. And to my knowledge, he didn't. So yeah,
Really
but I
powerful
think,
story.
yeah, I think it starts with how we see ourselves. And I think we need
Mm.
other people to see ourselves for who we really are. I think that's the way we're made. I think it's the way we're created.
Yeah.
And if you don't have those voices saying truthful things, they don't even always have to be positive. But if we don't have people that we trust saying, telling us truthful things about what they see, um, we're going to form an identity one way or another, but it could be really malformed if we
Oh,
lack.
absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely. And it goes back to family versus chosen family, right? So you
yeah,
brought that up. And
yeah,
um, anybody that's been around motorcycles or pancakes and this PODcakes podcast, they all know the chosen family and
Yeah.
what that means. But if somebody's coming from just a random search and they're listening here, or even from like maybe your followers from Epic, it the chosen family is that group of friends that's just their family.
Yeah.
Like when I met Critter, it was like I've known him my whole life. I
Yeah.
don't
I love it.
know why we just met it, but I've known this dude my whole life.
I loved hearing
And
that story when you told it.
yeah, and it's literally that chosen family, and it's just a group of people that I can go to and just be like, "Hey, I struggling right now. This is what's going on." And it's a support group. Just like what you were saying. They turn around, they support you, they listen to you, it's not always that guy code where you get together and you're just talking crap to one another.
Yeah.
It's not that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's almost embarrassing to bring up because you have family and you have chosen family. I have a lot of wonderful family.
Yeah.
I have family that I choose not to really see, talk with, or whatever. But I have a cousin that was adopted into the family. And I'm not going to get into too many details, but this is exactly what you were talking about earlier. Is her and her husband, they have a daughter, and they were arrested because he was having all his boys come over and have sex with his 13-year-old daughter.
Oh, Dad.
And horrible,
Yeah.
right? So that's like in my lineage on that side of the family. I'm
Yeah.
just like, I don't care about that's not family,
Yeah.
right? Those are not family for me. But these people over here, I love, I cherish, I care for. It's the blood's
Yeah.
not there, but it's the heart,
Yeah.
right? It's the emotional
Well,
connection.
and I think that's one of the beautiful things about people in general is you can, in the best case scenario, your family, um, forms you in such a way that as you grow and leave that family of origin, how to build bigger and broader families. It's like and I feel like that was the case with my family. Is like I learned internally inside of my home where I grew up, like it was a healthy family, and it has allowed me to broaden that family and those relationships. But the thing I just love about the way I think people are created is even in the absence of a healthy family, there's just something where it's hardwired in us. We long for what you described. So there's always the option of a chosen family. That's
Yeah.
always a possibility. So again, it's like you don't have to do this alone. And that's why I have so much respect for what you guys are doing and how you're doing it in such an organic way. Um, I think that's a powerful thing.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things I was going to lead up to with the chosen family is do you find that when you find a group of victims that maybe have been together, that they have almost, whether they realize it or not, they're each other's support group and in
Oh,
turn almost their chosen family?
my two very dear friends, Rebecca and Becca,
Oh,
were tra-
geez.
were were trafficked together, and they are as close a family. They're both out. They're both they're active in this work actually, but they are as sister like as any sisters I've ever seen. And I have three sisters, and I've raised three sisters. I know what sister energy is like, and Becca and Rebecca have that deep, deep knowledge because they suffered so much together at the hands of traffickers and buyers. So yeah, it does happen often.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's I can't even fathom
Yeah.
what they all go through.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back almost to the origins of Epic Project. So
Yeah.
you had that big ride, and you kind of did some other things,
Hmm.
Sturgis and everything. Um, when did you realize that Epic Project might be growing into something a little bit bigger than maybe you set out to do? Because it sounds like you're really nationally now with volunteers in 20
Yeah.
different cities.
Yeah. I think it was, when we started this particular program that I talked about, the cyber patrol, within about a year, we just realized. So, well, actually, I'll tell you a little bit of the backstory. So we had been doing these patrols in Portland at the time, and some folks in Boston, a foundation in Boston, had heard about us, and they were starting this program where they were going to select 11 cities across the country and pour a, a bunch of money into them, because the people in all 11 cities were doing some really creative stuff, and they're like, hey, we need to. The group was called Demand Abolition, and the head of it, she's like, we want to kind of be catalytic and put some money behind these folks to see what really works, because no one had done anything. And so we were the last one added to that group of 11 cities. After we had been doing the patrols for a year and a half, we were at a meeting where myself and the folks from the other 10 cities were together, and they shared some research that had been done. It wasn't without no, I didn't know it was going on, but they had tracked this metric called online purchase intent, and it's an e-commerce kind of metric where you would search, or you would study the relative increase or decrease of a certain cluster of keywords related to a product over time. Okay. So let's say it was, Triumph motorcycle clutches. And so they
Right.
would, so they would,
Hmm.
and they would track it. And it's just kind of this bar graph for 11 different cities. So the keywords that they were looking for were things related to trafficking, like hookup, prostitution, um, you know, I don't know what all the keywords were, but so, and the idea was they knew that it was happening online. And so they wanted to say, all right, how much activity is happening? So 11 cities, imagine a horizontal uh, graph, and and the volume stayed relatively steady and actually started to go up for 10 of the cities over a year and a half period. One city at a certain point in towards the end of 2013 took an almost 50% drop in online activity. That city was Portland, and October is when we started the patrols. And so we I was a kid in stats in college. I was happy to get a D. I was always really late at being able to like understand what I was
Right.
seeing. But in this meeting, they put it up on the screen. I'm like, holy cow! And everyone's looking at me, going, "What is going on?" That was the first moment for me when I realized that, yeah, this actually, taking this approach, focusing on disrupting the demand, and using technology to that end, like that, like, I think that was a moment where I'm like, oh crap, this actually might work. And so it's just kind of
Yeah.
took off from there. So that would have been about 2015 when I think I'm like, yeah, there's some work here for us to do. And I think that's probably around when I was really certain of that.
That's pretty impressive. And that e-commerce stuff, it was well, just a couple of years ago, all of that was going around about a particular website. I don't really want to say it on here and get get a hand slap on YouTube, but
Yeah.
um I know that it was coming out, and I was just, you see stuff on social media, so you got to take it with a grain of salt, of
Yeah.
course. But they were saying, particular things like exactly what you were saying. They would sell like a cabinet on this
Yeah.
website, and it was like you said, it had that wording in it, and people knew by reading the description, male, female, age, like maybe
Yeah. I,
location or whatever.
I would say the study that they did on us, it wasn't, these weren't coded words. These were things like hookup, sex, blowjob, like real graphic terms, because
Right.
that's what people look for. What you're talking about, I think that has been widely debunked. Like, I think that was
Okay.
yeah, I think that was a crazy conspiracy theory that
Perfect.
I think it did a lot of damage to the work, because it created this idea that this activity is happening underground, and um, it's being driven by this nefarious, secretive group of people, um, that we have to try to get to the bottom of. And I can tell you, having been in this work for a long time now, that's not who the people are that are causing the problem. It's the men you see at Applebee's on a Tuesday night that are buying sex and getting busted at undercover stings on a Wednesday night. And I know that because I've been there. Our guys have been there to see that happen. It's not a nefarious conspiracy with a certain group of people that are driving this. It's guys like you and me. It's people that look like us that are this. It's men that are buying sex that are driving the demand. And so, um, and again, for me, it just comes back to, like, this is our work to do. You talked about calling earlier, like this. Like, I feel called to keep carrying that flag. Like, the problem exists because men buy sex, and they do it with impunity. The risk. I heard a survivor who's done a ton of research on this. She said you're more likely to get struck by lightning than to get arrested for buying sex in America. So
Jeez.
the risk is so low, and that's where I feel like we need to go, guys. Come on, this is not right, and I'm going to say so, and I'm going to side with others who feel that way as well.
So since we're on the topic of like your cyber, what would you call it? The cyber patrol?
We call it cyber patrol. It just sounds
Okay.
it sounds cop like, so it's kind of cool. That's
Yeah.
all. That's all the more thought that went into it.
Oh yeah, a lot of decisions in my life just like that.
Yeah,
So with that being kind of set in place on 20 different cities across the country,
yeah.
do you think that if you had maybe some more volunteers, whatever, and they were bigger, would you stop more? Would you add the volunteers into the existing cities, or would you take other volunteers and move them and grow into more cities like city 21, 25, 30,
I I
etc.?
think it would, where we have had success, like, ongoing in a given city, is because there's somebody in that city who said, this is, like I said earlier, like, this is my work to do. Like, we need a quarterback on the
Hmm.
ground in a given city, and wherever we have that, what we've done is we've left it up to them to recruit like-minded guys, and then we come along and do the training and support of that. So it's really been a really organic sort of growth pattern, which seems to have worked better than, like what you were saying, to try to be strategic and say, we want to open a new chapter now in Des Moines, Iowa, or whatever. We've kind of taken the approach that we want to see where men rise up with a sincere commitment to lead and try to do something, and we're going to come alongside that. So
Okay.
we did that with a guy years ago, early on in the Detroit area, and he's phenomenal. He's one of the best leaders I've ever seen. Just grassroots kind of activism. He, a year ago, moved his family to Orlando, Florida, and we're all in on Brian Rossi. And whatever Brian feels led to do in Florida will be Epik's work in Florida. It might not be the cyber patrols. We just had a call today with some folks from the Jacksonville Jaguars, the NFL, and they want to know if we would consider being a part of a campaign through that NFL team. And so we don't have any firm details yet, but that's, I
It's pretty
think, how
rad.
we're growing. So whatever Brian Rossi, feels called to do in Florida, and he's got some really cool ideas, and we're going to support him in that effort. And that's it's not a real efficient way to probably to run an organization. Um, but if we're about the people, if we're about really good men who lead well, then that's what we're going to do.
That's actually really, I think that's a pretty big deal when you have a pro sports team take notice of
Yeah,
what you're doing
yeah.
and want to partner up. So, I mean, I think what you're doing is pretty amazing. Anyways, I wanted to say epic there, but I had to choose a different word. But I think it's pretty amazing, and I think the Jags getting involved, it's cool, and it's
Yeah,
definitely like we're getting some traction, things are happening,
yeah.
but I don't know if it takes away from any of the other stuff you guys have already done.
No, I think it feels like it's just a kind of affirmation that we're on the right
Yeah.
track, and yeah, we're just. I personally think we are blessed with some amazing men that have made this work their own as much as it's my own. And I think that's where really cool things happen. So yeah, I love, yeah, full circle. Like I love people. I love seeing what people are capable of doing, mostly together. Um,
Mhm.
Individually, we're capable of some pretty cool stuff too, but much more so like when we do stuff together. So seeing men come together around an issue like this that is so difficult, um, is it's a really amazing thing. So
Yeah, absolutely. So you
yeah,
talk about, Rebecca and Becca, right,
yeah.
being trafficked and having that super strong sisterhood. Um, have you had anybody that you guys have come in contact with, whether you guys have been kind of the rescuers, that has turned around and just came straight back to you guys to work?
You mean a guy?
Well, I mean, like, I know you have a lot of guys in there, but you were talking about you have these women that are kind of your coalition of
Kind of our elders.
experience. Yeah, exactly, like
Yeah.
the elders. Have anybody just step into that position?
There's always new ones that are surfacing, and it's just, again, it flows out of relationships. The anti-trafficking movement is a fairly small community of organizations around the country. So um, we kind of, everybody kind of knows everybody, but what has happened for us is as we have gotten to know survivors, the way I describe it is we hear these women share their stories and they inspire us, and always inspire us. Some of them, I'll make it more personal, inspired me. Some of that group of women then became over time my teachers. They know this, they have lived this, and so they become the people that I have gone to over and over again to say, hey, am I seeing this situation right? And so they inspired me, then they taught me, and then many of them just simply became my friends. And that was a real surprising experience for me, to see the friendships with these women that have grown. And that feels really counterintuitive because, men aren't supposed to have friendships with men, right? Or with other women, unless they're our wives. But what I've seen, and I think that's part of the problem. I think it's why the problem persists is we don't see women as as whole equal people separate from us. But when we do, we also, I think we can see there's someone who could be a friend, and there's there's legitimate, boundaries to those friendships. But I have friends
Mhm.
who are women, many friends that are formerly, prostituted women. I sat in this was I think the clearest example of it to me just a couple of years ago was at a meeting in Washington D.C. and it was late after a day of meetings one night, like 10 o'clock, and nobody wanted to walk to a restaurant to get dinner, and so I'm sitting in a hotel bar eating nachos and drinking a margarita with six formerly prostituted women and me. And I was just one of the girls. Like they just welcomed me into that club. And I've laughed about it every time I think about it because as a pastor, that would be, pretty scandalous, right? To
Oh
have
yeah.
been, seen in a, hotel bar. But it was one of the most authentic, relational, healthy experiences I've had in this work so far. These are full, thriving human beings that I'm, just we're just kind of sharing a slice of life together with, and it was. It felt safe. It felt appropriate. It felt full of trust and grace, and it's just a beautiful experience. And I've had many of those actually, just with these women that many of whom are my friends.
It's it's a beautiful thing that people can touch you emotionally and in that friendship realm
Yeah.
that you would think you would never know, and they
Well,
end up being your friends. Like I've heard you say, I've had this friend, this friend, this friend, this friend, and they're all from a very unfortunate time in their life,
yeah.
and coming across and just being your friend. I think that says a lot about your character too.
Well, it's profoundly humbling because if you look at it on the surface, I represent, as an older, white, educated, kind of middle class man, I represent buyers. I represent the group that has been the source of so much trauma for them. And yet they have extended this grace to me that says, no, I see you as a full human being. And I was never a sex buyer, but just, by virtue of being a man, um, I did not expect them. I'll say it this way. I did not expect to receive the genuine love and friendship from these women that I have received for 15 years. I did not expect that at all. And it moves me every time I think about it. I said
I think that's
goodbye.
beautiful.
I said goodbye to Andrea. She's the survivor up in Canada, the one that led this group. And I had my back to her as I'm walking out the door. And then, mind you, this is the first time that I'd actually been in physical proximity with her, like because we'd known each other on Zoom, like so many people over the years. So it's the first time I'd actually been with her, and I gave her a hug goodbye. I'm walking out the door, and she just goes, "I love you." And I thought about our conversation last summer.
Right.
Here is this woman saying to me, "I love you," and it's in my ears. It sounded like my daughter. She sounded like this. This is what my daughters used to say, just as I'm walking out the door. Love you. So and it was just this beautiful, real quick moment where I paused long enough, and I knew if I turned around and acknowledged it, I'd start ugly crying, and I just didn't want to do that with her. But to have her feel safe enough to say that to me,
Mhm.
um, I think I know I appreciate what you're saying about like my character. I think it's just an insane gift of grace that someone like her would be willing to say that to me, and it just blew me away.
Yeah,
So
I can see how that is a very powerful moment,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
And I think that is the word love is such a word that gets thrown around a little bit, you know.
yeah,
I had this conversation with my pops. Um somebody in the family passed away, and you know, somebody he hasn't seen in like 20 years was like, all right, well, I love you, bye. And he was like, okay. He kind of took it weird, you know, but I'm
Mhm.
the different guy where it's like, I think in those moments, your walls are down. I mean, I would
Yeah.
almost think that's exactly what you did is you guys have that little bit of a relationship where you know each other, the walls are down. Man, that is such a powerful way to say it, you know. I'm like we said last summer, like I remember the first time I said that to Critter, and he just was like, "Huh?" He was like, "Yeah, okay, I love you too, man. Whatever." You know, but now it's like we don't get off the phone or a video call or whatever
Yeah.
without like, "Dude, I love you, man. I love you too, bro. Later." You know, and it's
Yeah.
just it's appropriate. And like when I was up at Get Lost, we just embrace and we're like, "Hey, man, I love you, man." You know, we
Yeah.
take off. You know, we're trying to set. I think through the vulnerability and saying, "The heck with it, my walls are down," and him and I just being like that in public and whatever, that it's a pure, it's a brotherly love, you
Yeah.
know, that allows other people to see it and acknowledge it and know that that's okay. And I feel like that's exactly what whether she meant it that way or not, she's
Yeah.
showing the people that this is good. This is okay. That word is good.
I think that's exactly what she was doing. Yeah. And I think yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about identities. Like, I know that people, not everyone, but I know that I know that I'm loved. And when, it's that forms your identity. Like, when you know you are loved, whether it's your family or your chosen family, that's kind
Mhm.
of irrelevant. But when you know you are loved, um, it it does something to you. I had a teammate in college who was, by birth, he was the eldest son of a Samoan chieftain. Grew up I was born in Western Samoa, and he was this uh, just this wrecking ball of a middle linebacker, a big Samoan guy. And he was telling me one time, kept talking over the years, and this was years later. We were out of college and had families, and he was talking about his auntie and his uncle. And it's like, one time I stopped. I said, "Dude, how many people in your family?" And he goes, "You don't understand. Um, in the in my culture, uh, everyone, the way kind of he unpacked it for me, he said, in my culture, anybody that comes through my doors, they're one of four kinds of people: beloved, brother, sister, friend. Anyone that comes through my door is falls into one of those three categories." And it just like it shaped his whole life. So he has this big expansive view of what family is and what relationships can be. And I was so inspired by that. Whenever you come, next time you come to my house, you'll see it, because I had a like a little plaque made, so you see it right when you walk in the door: beloved, brother, sister, friend. And I've always felt like that's such a beautiful
Beautiful.
way. It's such a beautiful way to live your life. It's hard to live by it some days, but if you can see people and what I like about that is you get four categories to pick from. Um,
Right. Yeah.
but they're all really good. Your beloved, your brother, your sister, your friend. It's a win-win-win-win, kind of proposition if you can see people in one of those four categories. So, um, yeah, so that was always a really instructive way of looking at relationships, the way he talked about it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you started talking
Yeah.
about a small guy. I'm like, oh, this guy's probably pretty tiny. He said a wrecking ball of a linebacker.
He's yeah, no, he's his name is Pulutauza Utuonge Fatu Iono Nu'u. We called him Joe.
Wow.
We called him Joe New.
Joe knew.
Joe New.
Wow.
Yep. Yep. So
Oh man. So what's in the fires for Epic? Where do you see maybe an expansion or some projects or seminars, etc., that may
I
be coming
I
up?
I think right now we're just trying to strengthen ourselves organizationally, and so that the work will outlive me. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, but I turned 64 this year, and I know, I'm not going to be around forever. A big part of what we're trying to do is build the organization so that it's sustainable, and that's, it's a lot of like really not dramatic stuff, but having enough funding to just continue just a regular operation. So that's one thing. I think the other thing, one of the things I think that I'm really excited about is the our student prevention campaign, which is called "My Friends Are Not for Sale." And it's a very simple peer-to-peer prevention campaign that we're rolling out in schools right now in the Portland metro area, but try to broaden that. The program was envisioned by a kid, her senior year in high school. She's actually one of my wife's students, and she just got so much traction that as soon as she graduated, I hired her. I was able to find a small grant, and so she's working with us and really building out this strategy to reach middle and high school kids. I'm really excited about that as a new program initiative. Um, and then we've been doing these cyber patrols for 11 years, and we have a huge amount of data. And so we're working with a group in Texas right now and pursuing a research grant to really analyze, because we didn't start out as a data organization. We just ended up collecting all this information about the sex buyer ecosystem. And so we're working with this group in where are they? Austin, I believe, Allies Against Trafficking. Um, and we're working on a research project to really dig into all this data we've been collecting over the years. So we have a lot of things in a lot of different areas, but um, the big thing for me personally is to continue just carrying this banner of, you know demand, and men, like we talked about earlier, not looking away from the ugly reality that
Yeah.
exploitation happens because guys like us think it's okay to buy another human being. And so these kind of conversations with folks like you are really right in my wheelhouse. I got a call today from a volunteer who's wants to connect me with a columnist from the New York Times or Washington Post, but to talk about this like at that level, and get that word out in more kind of large scale media outlets, which I'm really eager to do. Um, so yeah, and then just continue doing what we can to support and champion survivors, and um, that's just more born out of relationships. So we get calls periodically, say, hey, can you help with this or that? And so just that's always fun to say. Back to what I was talking about when we bought the airplane ticket for her, because a partner was working with this survivor and we were able to help. We've been able to continue to do that, but now it's not me doing it. I can call any number of other guys who are part of this network of Epik, and I can say, hey, we need help with this. And the guys are on it. There were three of our folks in the last 24 hours um, working to help find a missing kid in New York City. And
Wow.
we, I was the last one in the loop on it. My Lauren was part of it, and then a couple of our other guys, like they were on it, and I'm happy to report they found her. She's a developmentally disabled adult now. She's like 19, but very vulnerable. And so that just happened. That just happened in the last 24 hours because we have this relational network of people. It's like, hey, call the guys at Epik. They might know, they might be able to do something, or at least they'll know someone. And that was the case. Like we knew, we called another partner organization, and the head of it is a former NYPD detective. And so we were able to mobilize it. So that stuff happens all the time. What I love about that is it's born out of the relationships that we have,
Right.
with people. Excuse me.
I think that is I think that's pretty crazy that just in the last 24 hours it was just, hey, let's go find this girl. And I think that's a pretty amazing for you guys to have that kind of a reach to find somebody.
Well,
So, I mean, especially in NYC, that's not a little town.
well, there were people, our partners, trying to figure out what to do. The crazy thing about it is we actually, in the end, none of us had anything to do with her being found. She was just recognized on the street by someone who knew she was missing. I mean, we were actively trying to help, but like I don't take credit. We don't take credit for the kid being found, but we were able to rally people to pay more attention. And so yeah, she just happened. Someone just happened to see her, and yeah,
that's pretty good, man.
yeah.
So I guess I want to say this could be the most important question of the night, but it's definitely not. Like it can't overshadow the work. When are we going to go ride?
Well, you know where you and I both live, so
Yeah,
it's a crapshoot every day whether or not we can get out and stay dry. But I wanna wander the deserts of far southeastern Oregon. So I want to go to Steens Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it?
Absolutely.
The Alvord Desert.
Yeah, the Alvord Desert. Okay,
I've been to Crystal Crane Hot Springs
you're close.
Outside of Burns. That's as far east as I got, as far south. So
okay. Well, from Crystal Cranes, you can see Steens from there. And just on the other side of that is the Alvord. And man, I tell you, jump on your GS because that would be a GS ride for sure.
I shouldn't take the Indian.
No.
What if I put knobby? I'll put knobby tires on it.
Well, okay. No. The Steens Mountain Loop. I did that for the first time a few years ago with my dad, and I don't understand why that's not a national park. It is one of the most breathtaking places I've ever been around.
Yeah.
And you stand up there and you're just looking down at this old volcano and these giant, just smooth cliffs from the ice, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
It is. It's breathtaking to be up there, and then you're looking down as well as the Alvord. And so, really, what you do is you go to French Glen and you stop off there at the little coffee shop, have yourself a nice little coffee, and get out and sit on the deck. This really old historic building. Then you jump on your bike, go about 30 feet, make a left on Steen Mountain Road. And you do that. It's like a 50-mile or 53-mile loop or whatever. And then you end up over at Field Station for hamburger and milkshake.
It's a must. Oh, the people don't appreciate the culinary part of riding a motorcycle. You just described it.
Yeah. And then after you get done there, you go inside if you want a couple beverages or whatever, and you put them on your bike, and then you go camp out on the Alvord for the night.
Yeah,
and you have the most breathtaking view of the Milky Way, and man, it's epic down there.
Let's do that. I bet you we could get Lauren to come over from Medford, and she's got a network of friends there. She'll probably get her dad to come. He's awesome.
Would be awesome. Yeah, that would be rad.
That'd be fun.
Oh yeah. We'll tell my dad to meet us at the Alvord first, because he can't ride anymore after the accident, so he can get on in his Jeep and like have camp and
Well,
food set up for us.
I was going to say, yeah, he could he could set up for us. Yeah, sounds like a
Right.
plan. Yeah,
Support
here you go.
vehicle. See, it's there. We'll drop it on the socials, right? So
Yeah,
everybody can not meet us there at that time.
yeah,
But yeah, there's a couple other things wouldn't mind picking your ear about, but I don't think that's something we should do live. I think that's a private conversation for you and
okay,
I,
okay,
but I think we've also been going for about 2.5 hours right now.
yeah, yeah,
And I think we probably hit a pretty good segue to go ahead and for this one, because I think as you grow and things grow, I would really like to continually have people like yourself and Lauren able to come back on and keep this at the forefront, and keep people knowing what's going on. And then I
yeah.
know that she's putting on her, I forget what it's called, the second
The
annual
Southern Oregon Defenders Summit or
yeah.
Disruptors Summit. Sorry, Disruptors Summit.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So, I that's a pretty big deal for her,
yeah,
super proud. And I think, friendships all the way around are great to build on too. So,
yeah.
what are your socials? You want to drop those? Because I got the epicproject.org up on the other computer screen right
Yeah.
now.
I don't know. Lauren's in charge of that. We'll have to. Yeah, follow Epic Project on. Well, hang on. I got my phone here. I can
Yeah, there we
probably.
go.
I could probably figure that out.
I can message Lauren too and have her send me all the links. We'll put them
Yeah.
right down here in the show notes. We'll
Have
do that anyways.
yeah. It's what is it? I don't know.
I
Call
think it's
Laura.
just Epic Project with
I
it's
think it's
Epic with a K.
yeah underscore project. I believe.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
Laura.
it's pretty obvious. You guys have the orange arrows that in your
Mhm.
logo. And so if you just if you're on the socials, just look up Epic with a K, EPIK. Um you'll see them pop up. That's how I found you
Okay,
guys.
that's great.
Like I said, I'll put all your links down here. And I'm also going to put the link for your story down
But
here.
yeah,
And then I'll
that's great.
probably put the one for Lauren. She was just a couple episodes ago, but
Yeah,
dude, I really appreciate you coming on. This is such an eye-opening topic for me. Really started with Lauren and then you coming on and talking about because I feel like there's a lot of crossover and a lot of similarities, but
hmm
they're also different,
yeah.
And I think it's
But
been really amazingly eye-opening. And like I said, trafficking what I thought and what it is completely different.
yeah,
And being able to know that I fully support everything that you're doing. And if there's any way that my platform can help you have access to it whenever you need it.
yeah, I appreciate that.
So
I think
just a
that
phone call away.
yeah, I think the common denominator between what you're doing and what we're doing is figuring out all the ways that we can nurture and cultivate healthy men. I think
Yeah,
I think that's the thread that connects it. Um, and yeah, so we're in that sense we're in the same space. So we'll connect again very soon.
absolutely, my friend.
Yeah,
All right. And I think with that,
awesome.
we'll go ahead and say goodbye.
All right,
Thanks,
man.
my friend. Yeah.
Okay, see ya.